We'll use AS and AD curves to explain some recent features. Now, I know nobody likes to think back to 2020, but the big event in the last few years was a pandemic lockdown, along with fears about things that were beyond our control. One of the early impacts of lockdown was a dramatic decrease in aggregate demand. People were stuck at home with a lot fewer things to spend money on. Also, people got worried about what might be coming next, and they stopped or significantly delayed a lot of purchases, which in turn meant that a lot of people lost their jobs and spent less money. Now, there's a great variation in different geographies, how much different places locked down. New York had a pretty strict lockdown. Other states, there was a lot less. But that didn't matter that much. People were scared, they cut back their spending. Now, there's some degree of circularity here, which is an important feature of a lot of macroeconomics. Since people were worried that they might lose their job, therefore they cut back spending. As a lot of people cut back spending, therefore a lot of people lost their jobs. These are self-fulfilling expectations or spirals. That happens going up and going down, spirals of causation. Now, also in the pandemic, there was a lowering of aggregate supply as well. Lockdowns meant that some people were not allowed to go to work. Supply chains got complicated. Some factories shut down for an amount of time because they didn't have parts to make the product. That had effects throughout the whole economy. If one supplier reduced output, didn't make as much, then everyone who's buying their products as inputs couldn't get those and had their own difficulties, and they in turn had to shut down. Both aggregate demand and aggregate supply falling, GDP fell a lot. It was the biggest, quickest decline in GDP we've seen in the US. We had a very sharp recession. Fortunately, it was also very short because the government stepped in and made some tremendous efforts to give people money. It allowed them to spend more money, and that increased aggregate demand. It pushed aggregate demand significantly outwards. Aggregate supply was still complicated. Businesses still faced supply chain issues. As the economy started recovering, Russia invaded Ukraine, and that led to a significant price change in the price of energy, oil and natural gas. That was felt harder in Europe since it was closer, but had knock-on effects throughout the whole world, and potential GDP did not increase nearly as much. With aggregate demand rising significantly while aggregate supply not as much, or getting steeper in some cases, we saw GDP recover. We're back to record low rates of unemployment. GDP's way up. But we also have inflation. We've had tremendous increases in the price level. Inflation rates that the US has not seen at any point in decades. We went from the problem of GDP being too low and unemployment high, and then quickly transitioned to the opposite problem. GDP doing well, but inflation now being too high. Therefore, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, which lowered aggregate demand, cooled off inflation. They don't want to lower 80 too far, though. That might cause another recession. We have to see if they get the right balance.